very frightening, very scary. Don't be alarmed, because you see, it's only a picture.
Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Evil Dead 2. So I am continuing the trend of talking about horror movie sequels for this Spooktober. I started this month by talking about Halloween 2. Then the last video I did, I talked about Friday the 13th, the final chapter. And today I'm going to be talking about not just one of my favorite horror movies ever, but one of my favorite movies of all time. I really cannot overstate just how important and influential this movie is to me personally on my journey of discovering all these great movies when I was in my early to mid-teens. And it's one of those films that I credit for sparking my passion for filmmaking. In fact, I'm wearing a Evil Dead 2 themed shirt that I got from Fright Rags. Love this thing. Yeah, but I absolutely love Evil Dead 2, and I pretty much love the Evil Dead franchise as a whole, with the exception of the latest Evil Dead movies, which I'll talk a little bit later on in this video. But yeah, the Evil Dead franchise, where to begin? Obviously, I'm talking about this movie today not just because I love it and I'm obsessed with it, but, you know, I think it's one of the greatest horror movie sequels ever. But is this movie even really a sequel? And there's kind of a backstory to that. But before I do that, for those who may not be aware of the Evil Dead franchise, the entire series, including the movies that don't include Sam Raimi directing and Bruce Campbell starring as Ash, all of the movies are related around the book, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis.
Roughly translated, Book of the Dead.
That is bound by human flesh and inked in human blood, and legend has it was written by the Dark Ones. And this book contains secret passages that can bring an evil demonic force into our reality. And if these passages are spoken out loud, or if you hear them being spoken via a tape recorder, then that'll be enough to resurrect these demons to be brought into this reality, possessing everybody around, and creating a lot of scenarios where there's going to be a lot of gore and a lot of goop and a lot of that great horror movie goodness. Very, very simple but fun kind of creative idea for the time, and that's where Evil Dead really begins, where you have a group of college students, you know, Sam Raimi being the band leader and being like, look, I want to get into making movies, and horror movies are a great place to start because you can make them for fairly inexpensive. They're easy to get funding for because, you know, a lot of people want to watch horror movies. And that was kind of what sparked on the idea of doing Evil Dead. It started off with a short film starring Bruce Campbell called Within the Woods. And they used that short in order to get funding from people and producers, you know, to create Evil Dead on a very short budget. And the first Evil Dead movie is a great movie when you learn the context of how it was made. When you watch it today, it's obviously, you can tell it's a very low budget movie, but I think that adds to the appeal and the grimy atmosphere that the movie has that makes it feel kind of special and unique. There's not much of a story. These college kids go up to a cabin and they accidentally resurrect these demons by listening to this archaeologist's tape recording. And everybody gets possessed and hacked up, and Ash Williams, played by, of course, the iconic Bruce Campbell, is our main hero throughout the majority of this franchise. And that's the other interesting thing to point out. The first three Evil Dead movies kind of remind me of the first three Mad Max movies, where each movie feels very different from the other. The continuity is not really there. It doesn't really matter. It's not about that. It's about kind of just like being in this world and in this reality with these specific types of things. In the case of Mad Max, that's post-apocalyptic, you know, car mayhem and action. And in the case of Evil Dead, it's deadites, possessed demons, gory, goopy action. And that leads us into Evil Dead 2. So originally, Evil Dead 2 was going to pick up right where the first Evil Dead movie left off. But Sam Raimi was unable, and his producers were unable to get the rights from the first Evil Dead movie. Quick edit here, something I forgot to mention in the video. The reason Sam Raimi had to remake Evil Dead is because he originally wanted to go right from the first Evil Dead movie into Army of Darkness, but he wasn't able to get the rights to the first Evil Dead movie. He wasn't able to afford it to do a recap to lead into Army of Darkness, which is why he ended up remaking, essentially, Evil Dead with Evil Dead 2, so it could lead up to the events that would eventually go into Army of Darkness. And so that results in Sam Raimi essentially remaking Evil Dead, where instead of Ash going up to the cabin with all of his college buddies and his girlfriend, this time around it's just Ash going to the cabin with his girlfriend Linda. And literally within like 2 to 3 minutes of this movie wastes no time at all to get to the good horror fun action, which once that starts, it does not stop until you get to the very end of this movie. I mean, the pacing of Evil Dead 2 is relentless as hell, and that's one of the reasons why I love it so much. Of course, the demons are resurrected the exact same way, where Ash stumbles upon this mysterious, creepy-looking book, and then he sees a tape recorder, and then we get a little bit of a backstory about how the archaeologist found this book, and, you know, him reading from it, and he's reading from it within this tape recorder, and that's what summons the evil spirits. And then poor Ash, I mean, he really gets run through the ringer in this movie. He has to decapitate his possessed girlfriend with a shovel and then bury her. And if that's not bad enough, she ends up being resurrected via claymation, doing a creepy interpretive dance by the window and then floating off into the night and then coming back to harass and torment Ash to the point where her fallen head is biting on his hand and, you know, he just can't get this thing off. And so he has to go to the work shed to cut her up with a chainsaw. And then that's when we get introduced to more side characters, which we didn't get from the first movie in Evil Dead 2, where these side characters, who I've seen this movie like a million times, and I still can't remember the name of most of the characters in the movie, with the exception of Bobby Joe, because there's literally a scene where that hillbilly guy is going into the woods screaming Bobby Joe over and over again. Bobby Joe! Bobby Joe! Bobby Joe! Bobby Joe! Bobby Joe! But the other main side character in this movie outside of Ash is a girl named Annie, who is the daughter of the archaeologist who discovered the Book of the Dead, and she just recently retrieved the lost passages from the book, and they're going to go to the cabin to rendezvous with their parents. But of course, she is unaware that the book resurrected these evil spirits that killed, essentially, her father and mother. And when she gets there, Ash is there all covered in blood because he was tormented earlier. And if that's not bad enough, after he got bit on the hand, his hand gets possessed, and he has to deal with that in one of the most iconic and awesome scenes in this movie. I remember that was one of the moments as when I was watching this movie for the first time when I was around 15, 16 years old. It was when that scene started to happen where Ash is hitting himself in the head because he's fighting his evil hand, and then Bruce Campbell literally flips himself for real onto the hardwood floor, and then the hand is crawling after the knife, and he has to cut off his own hand. And then shortly after that, he puts the bucket on top of the hand with a stack of books, with the main book on top being Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. And that was the moment where I'm like, dude, this might be the greatest movie I've ever seen. And then, of course, we get more awesome nonsense where the hand breaks free and is running around the house, giving Ash the finger, and Ash is trying to shoot it with the shotgun, and then he sort of succeeds. He hears a whimpering sound after he shoots a hole in the wall, and then a little blood drips down, and then he just gets waterboarded with demon cabin blood that looks like Kool-Aid, and it starts to change colors. And right off the bat, you know, it fairly early on in the movie, you can tell that's like, okay, this movie has a very different tone from the first Evil Dead. The first Evil Dead movie, it's mainly just a template to show low-budget, fun, gory special effects, as well as to show Sam Raimi's very unique way of cinematography, you know, putting cameras in certain areas that you wouldn't really see other movies do. The POV, the way the camera kind of floats around, and how Sam Raimi and the cast and crew had to make like these DIY type of devices in order to achieve those type of camera movements. I mean, all of the great stuff in Evil Dead, the first one, gets even better in Evil Dead 2. And on top of that, you get, I think, something that Sam Raimi wanted to do in the first movie, but, you know, obviously they didn't want to take many risks because they wanted to be a, you know, classic gory horror movie. He wanted to inject his own particular brand of humor.
They had written a new scene, and the new scene involved Ash going into the work shed with Linda's severed head, and he puts the head in a vise and he tightens the head, and then through the doorway bursts open, and Linda's severed torso comes in with a chainsaw over its head. And I remember reading that going, wow, that's really creepy. I mean, that's going to be scary as hell. So the door bursts open, and this Kermit Muppet comes through the door. I just sat there and I went, well, this isn't really as scary as I had imagined, but then again, Sam wasn't really going for, all-out scares.
Spin the dummy, spin it. A little louder. Higher on the dummy.
Because that's the thing that I discovered while, reading about the making of the Evil Dead movies and listening to the commentary and stuff, is that Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell and their group of friends in Michigan were Three Stooges nerds. And they were obsessed with slapstick comedy, and the Three Stooges in particular, and that they loved, like, silly, goofy nonsense. That was kind of their thing. And that's where Evil Dead 2 comes in, where it's like, well, we're going to basically remake Evil Dead and add all the stuff and make it more fun. I think that's what Sam Raimi's goal was to do with this franchise, is make a slapstick horror movie, essentially. And that's what Evil Dead 2 is. So from there, Ash is discovered at the cabin by the group of side characters, and they're led to believe that he's a crazy psycho murderer who doesn't have a hand and murdered Annie's parents. Gets kicked into the cellar. Annie discovers the tape recorder and starts playing it, where after the father recited the evil passages from the Necronomicon, basically talks about how Annie's mother got possessed, Henrietta. That's the other name that I remember from this movie. And just when you thought this movie couldn't get more ridiculous, with all the hand stuff, and then like the scenes where the objects in the house and the deer head are laughing at Ash, and he's going crazy, and all of that absurd nonsense that is super awesome, especially the scene after he cuts up his girlfriend, where he's talking to himself in the mirror. We just cut up our girlfriend with a chainsaw. Does that sound fine? Just when you think this movie couldn't get any crazier, we get one of my biggest laughs in the movie, where Ash is locked in the cellar by the rest of the characters upstairs, and then Henrietta comes up from the basement, and we get a great, hilarious man scream. And then right after that, we get one of the most iconic moments in this movie, where Ash jumps on the cellar door, launching an eyeball into Bobby Joe's mouth. So obviously, more chaos ensues. Annie's boyfriend gets possessed. Ash chops him up. He turns into green goo. Bobby Joe's had enough after she makes contact with Ash's evil hand, as well as the scene where we see the ghost, or the specter of Annie's father, runs off into the woods. And that's the moment where you're like, oh no, are they going to do the tree rape scene again? Which Sam Raimi's talked openly about how he kind of regretted that scene in the first Evil Dead movie. He's like, I don't really want to like upset people. I want to entertain people. And so the tree scene in this movie is awesome. And it doesn't go a step too far. And that's where we discover there's a prophecy in the Necronomicon, in the Lost Pages. It's foretelling a prophecy of the Chosen One. And we just happen to see a cartoon drawing. That drawing always makes me laugh because of how amateurish it looks. Of a man with a chainsaw hand. But before that prophecy will be fulfilled, Ash has to turn into an evil demon. After that hillbilly tries to force him and Annie at gunpoint to go in the woods to find Bobby Joe after she got messed up by that tree. So Ash turns into a demon, but then he is able to rediscover his humanity after he finds the magnifying glass necklace, which was also in the first movie, that he gave to Linda, and that helps him rediscover who he is. And then he's able to defeat the possession, which I think is the only time that really happens in any of the Evil Dead movies. And then that's when him and Annie decide to team up and recover the Lost Pages to defeat this evil once and for all. But before we do that, Ash has to gear up. We get a final battle between Ash and Henrietta, who can shapeshift, which creates one of the other funniest scenes in this movie, where Ash cuts off the head, and the head is deflating like a balloon, like and then I'll swallow your soul, I'll swallow your soul. Swallow this. Oh my god. It's just, this movie's just so fucking awesome. And that's where the amazing ending of this movie comes in, where Annie is reciting the passages from the Lost Pages that'll bring back this portal, essentially, a wormhole, if you will, that will suck the evil out of the world. But before that happens, Ash has to go up against an evil tree, which is just like, once again, this movie, it just progressively gets more insane as it goes along. It gets crazier and crazier and crazier, and it just does not stop, and it is glorious. It is fucking glorious. And he's stabbing the tree in the eye with his awesome chainsaw arm. It's shooting blue goo all over him and all that stuff. Annie, unfortunately, gets stabbed in the back with that Necronomicon blade. She's able to finish off the passages before she dies, but unfortunately, when we think the wormhole has succeeded, it comes back. And it sucks Ash back into the hole, and that's where we get one of the greatest cliffhangers in movie history, as far as I'm concerned, where Ash gets taken back to medieval times, and the movie ends with him going, no, no, after we see a great cameo from Sam Raimi as one of the knights. But of course, as we would find out just a few years after Evil Dead 2, this is all leading up to another amazing movie, Army of Darkness, which is a very, very different movie from pretty much all of the Evil Dead movies, in that it's more of an action fantasy adventure than it is an outright horror movie. And that's also the movie where Ash kind of becomes fully formed as a character. The Ash that we all know and love, that would continue to be that character in Ash vs. Evil Dead, which I absolutely adore that show. But that's kind of what makes the original Evil Dead trilogy so special, is that, you know, each movie's very different. They try to do different things, and they all highlight the incredible creativity of Sam Raimi as a filmmaker. And Evil Dead 2, as far as I'm concerned, is the highlight of the series as a whole. It's really the moment where Sam Raimi kind of discovered what makes this horror franchise special and unique in comparison to other horror movies. It's his unique brand of comedy in combination with extreme gore and violence, in combination with his amazing and wonderfully creative cinematography and fun visual effects, and just overall tongue-in-cheek, macabre absurdity. That's what makes the Evil Dead franchise special, and that's what makes Evil Dead 2 such an influential movie, just in terms of sheer creativity and imagination. And it's also why I don't really care for where the franchise has been going in recent years. Full disclosure, I've not seen Evil Dead Rise yet. I did see Evil Dead, the 2013 remake. I remember going to see that movie and being like, oh, that's really gory, and, you know, I'm sure people are going to like it if they're not familiar with the other Evil Dead movies, but it was kind of forgettable. Like, I watched it once, didn't really feel the need to see it again. It's basically, it did the thing that a lot of horror remakes were doing at the time, where it was just like, all right, let's take this older horror movie from the 80s, remake it for a modern audience, and kind of give it that appeal, and that's really about it. It doesn't really do anything that much newer or different, or, you know, it's very much a movie of what it is, which is a early 2010s gory horror movie that doesn't really have the personality or the style or the memorability of the original Evil Dead movies. Now, a lot of people tend to really, really love Evil Dead 2013. In fact, I see people go as far as to say it's their favorite Evil Dead movie ever, which, you know, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I definitely don't get that reaction from it. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't seen Evil Dead Rise yet, because it looks like more of the same, where, you know, I guess I'll give the movie credit that it's not taking place in a cabin, it's taking place in an apartment building. But it's more of like, okay, here's some random forgettable characters that you don't really care about getting turned into deadites, and a bunch of gory stuff happens. It doesn't have the secret sauce, which the Evil Dead secret sauce is 2 parts. It's 1 part Sam Raimi and 1 part Bruce Campbell. Ash is the heart and the backbone of the Evil Dead franchise. And Evil Dead movies without Ash, I don't know. I don't really see the appeal. It's almost like making a Batman movie without Batman, or a Batman TV show without Batman, aka Gotham, a show that, when I heard about that show, I'm like, they're making a Batman show that doesn't have Batman in it. Okay, count me in as who gives a shit. That's kind of how I feel about the new Evil Dead movies, and because Evil Dead Rise was so successful, we're going to get more one-off Evil Dead movies that are basically just going to do more of the same type of shit that you've seen from the Evil Dead 2013, where it's going to be hyper serious, it's going to be hyper gory and violent and extreme, and that's really about it. And to me, Evil Dead is more than just those things. So not to sound like an elitist, but for me, Evil Dead really ends, or it ended, with season 3 of Ash vs. Evil Dead, where we get that amazing cliffhanger that's very reminiscent of the cliffhanger from Evil Dead 2. I actually find it to be a kind of a fitting ending for the series, even though if that's not the intended ending originally, it still kind of works given the tradition of these movies. But Evil Dead 2, yeah, that's the movie that made me a hardcore fan of this franchise. It made me a hardcore fan of Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, and I just can't say enough good things about how amazing and unique and rewatchable that movie is. I'm like, I'm not even kidding. Right up there with Die Hard, You know, Evil Dead 2 and Aliens also, for that matter, is one of my most rewatched movies, and I just rewatched it again for the millionth time this Spooktober, even though I was like, you know what? I'll save it for next year. I'll watch some other horror movies. But I was like, you know what? It just feels wrong not to watch Evil Dead 2 because it's one of my favorite movies, things ever. I just love it. So anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on Evil Dead 2. But I want to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on Evil Dead 2? What are your thoughts on the Evil Dead franchise as a whole? Which film is your favorite? Do you like the newer Evil Dead movies? Are you a fan of Ash vs. Evil Dead? Mention it in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.